We're convening a trio of reporters now to discuss the governor's Condition of the State address and look ahead at the 2017 legislative session. Joining us, Radio Iowa's news director Kay Henderson, the Gazette's James Lynch, and Iowa Public Television's David Yepsen, who incidentally will be taking the reins of Iowa Press beginning next week. I want your overall, if you can, appraisal of what you heard the governor's Condition of the State message, just the overall tenor, and I might just say my reaction was never in a Condition of the State address have I ever heard the Lieutenant Governor mentioned so often by name. And I think maybe, David, that gave a hint of the fact that this was a transition speech.
There's no question about it. Governor Branstad has been spending much of his tenure with the Lieutenant Governor setting her up to succeed him, and today's speech just was part of that program.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It was partly passing of the baton. It was also trying to send the message that while I'm here, I'm ready to do some things, folks. And here's a list of things that I would be more than happy to do while I'm still here in Iowa and being your state's governor.
But the speech also, Jim, contained those normal, this is what we've accomplished so far, and isn't it great, and we love wind.
Yeah, exactly. You brag a little bit, you talk about the hardships you've overcome, and then you talk about the future, and you talk about those things like, yes, we love wind energy. And that, you know, it's interesting, he got a great response to that.
I was actually, though, surprised that there wasn't more of a retrospective part of this speech, because this, as he himself mentioned, was his final Condition of the State message. And I expected a little bit more. I think at the end, his hat tip to his family and to the friendships he's made as governor was perhaps all he wanted or needed to do.
He talked a little bit about the farm crisis, the bank failure in Bloomfield, and a few of those things, but I agree with Kay that I thought he might talk more about the past, some of the highlights, what he's overcome.
I thought it was significant what the speech wasn't. This was a moderate-sounding Terry Branstad. He's learned from what's happened to other Republican governors around the country. This was not a Scott Walker in Wisconsin trashing collective bargaining. He wants to make some small changes. This was not Sam Brownback in Kansas wanting to cut taxes, which has trashed that state's finances. This wasn't a Pat McGrory, the former governor of North Carolina, who lost because he wanted to get into transgender toilets. And it wasn't. It just didn't even get into the issue of limits on abortions. He dealt with Planned Parenthood, but he's learned some things, I think, from some other governors about a more moderate tenure. Now, what the legislature does with this remains to be seen.
But by the same token, Kay, what I saw in that speech, regardless of what Dave just said, regardless of that, I heard mentions in there of some controversial things that sometimes don't make it into these Condition of the State messages. They emerge later in the governor's agenda, but aren't mentioned in a speech like this. He didn't shy away from those today.
Well, he has a Republican legislature. I remember the last time he had a Republican legislature for those 2 years at the end of his previous run, 16-year run as governor. He talked about the death penalty and a horrific case. Anna Marie Emery had been killed. He used her example to exhort legislators to action on reinstating the death penalty in Iowa. The other thing, and back to David's point about he's learned, David and I both covered him when he came out here and proposed major tax reform, and it fell like a thud with Republican legislators. So, you know, being governor for 22 years has given him the seasoning so that he isn't putting out there things that he knows that he will get slapped in the face about.
Going back to you, Jim, on some comments that you made, are you saying that there was more of a subdued mood in this speech than you had expected it would be?
Yeah, exactly. I thought he was very subdued. His voice came up a few times when he talked about wind energy, for example, something that he's sort of passionate about. But it was very subdued throughout. It was a very moderate speech, as David had said. no applause lines really throughout the whole speech.
You mean written into the speech?
Written into the speech. I mean, he got applause for some of the things he talked about, but there weren't, obvious applause lines. And then at the end, when he talked about his wife, Chris, and family, his voice tightened a little bit, which, showed a little bit of emotion, but otherwise very subdued.
Dave, you used the word moderate. Now, is that a Terry Branstad that is an acceptable governor to the Republican-controlled legislature? Is moderation the theme that'll play here?
Moderate was not a term you would use to describe Terry Branstad at the start of his political career, or when I first met him down at the University of Iowa and when we were students. It tells you where the Republican Party has come. It also how far to the right it has moved. And I think he's pulling on the reins here a little bit with these legislators, because there are a lot of them that do want to make dramatic changes. They're full of themselves. They want a great victory. There's pressure to do all kinds of things, particularly on some of these controversial social issues. And I've detected Terry Branstad not only learning from all his experience, but also maybe pulling on the reins a little bit, saying, let's not overdo this. We can hold on to this majority for a long time if we don't mess it up.
If I wanted to be cynical, I might think that Terry Branstad was being very moderate because he doesn't want to give anybody in the Senate any ammunition to use against him when he comes up for confirmation hearing as ambassador to China. If he proposed some radical social agenda, that might come back to haunt him.
The other thing that struck me in the speech was his call for action regarding Iowa's spike in traffic fatalities. He proposed ending texting while driving and sort of a crackdown on the use of cell phones. That really doesn't fly with some of the Republican Party who really are into individual rights and not infringing on those rights. You saw some key legislators, particularly senators, who did not applaud, while many others stood and applauded, including a lot of Democrats, to those proposals.
Did you see some specifically that you remember weren't applauding on the cracking down on drivers?
Well, we've all covered over the past few years Brad Zahn, a champion of getting rid of those traffic enforcement cameras. The governor didn't mention that, which has been sort of a touchstone for many Republican legislators here. They hate those traffic enforcement cameras. And the fact that he didn't include that in his traffic proposal was sort of interesting.
Jim, you along with Kay are up here every day covering the legislative session. This is a session that will see the governor reduce the state budget halfway through this fiscal year by $100 million. How is that going to affect the tenor of the working relationship between the legislature and the governor, if at all?
Well, legislative leaders say they're on the same page, that they want to protect K-12 education, Medicaid, and property tax credits. Although I detect that maybe property tax credits aren't as safe as the other hold harmless agenda items. But it's hard when you start cutting budgets. Everybody wants to do more, and Republicans want to cut taxes, and it makes it hard to cut taxes when you have to cut the budget first.
And back to the property taxes, that is pass-through money. That's the state giving local governments money to afford, if you will, those property tax cuts. And Republicans, by and large, have chafed at the governor's insistence that the state send money to local governments to cover some expenses. They would like to see local governments held back as well in terms of their finances, and so that's why they're less amenable to not going after those property tax cuts.
Dave, on the cuts that the governor must make, how much leverage does the legislature have in what the governor wants to do and where he wants to exert those reductions in the current state budget?
Well, they'll have some, but here's what any governor always has an advantage in their budget, because all the pieces fit together. If you're it's like a house of cards. If you're a legislator and you want to come in here and pull one thing out, a lot of other stuff falls apart. $100 million is a lot of money, but in the great scheme of things, it's not a lot of money. It's certainly not what other states are having to do. I think there was a lot of things in this speech that I bet if we poll tested them would all pass muster with most people in Iowa. Apprenticeship programs, computer education. It wasn't a hard edge. This was a soft-sounding speech, and I think most of the legislature they'll huff and puff, and they'll want to cut more. Some of the conservatives will, but at the end of the day, they won't be able to come up with much more than what he has.
Lawmakers also understand that the longer they delay on the cuts, the harder it becomes. I mean, every day they don't make a cut, they're losing the savings.
The more impact it has, adverse
Right.
effect it has also on the agency that's being reduced, because they're further along in that budget, which they have trouble reducing at that time.
The other thing about the speech is that he recommended sort of another reorganization of state government. In 1986, he signed into law major restructuring, which greatly reduced the number of agencies in state government. This time around, he's asking legislators to take a look at the number of boards and commissions.
Yes.
And in talking with the governor prior to this speech, he was describing some regulatory overreach that he thinks some of these state boards and commissions have engaged in, and he wants a crackdown. He wants fewer state boards. He has trouble finding people to serve on these state boards and commissions. So that may be a really interesting thing to watch as legislators struggle with going after some of these kingdoms and taking away some of the power of some of these state agencies.
Yes, and that won't play well, then, you're saying, Kay, among some state legislators.
Well, for instance, he's going to go after hospitals. There's a process by which hospitals compete in terms of expansion. If they buy something that's more than $1.5 million, they have to get state approval from a board. He thinks that board is out of control, and that will really have an effect on the state's healthcare industry.
Well, that's the certificate of need law that hospitals can't build significant new buildings without getting a certificate of need.
And he ridicules the fact that Des Moines' two largest hospitals built two brand new hospitals a block apart in West Des Moines, and getting permission from that board.
Dave, what did you hear in the Water Quality Initiative? See, that last year got through the House, didn't make it through the Senate. Rob Hogue, the Senate minority leader now, who was in the majority last time around, it didn't pass in the Senate. Now he's looking favorably upon that. How do you read that?
Well, water quality is a big issue, huge issue. And so this legislature has got to come up with a bumper sticker that says we did something about water quality. The proof will be in the details and how much money they can come up for it. So I think they want to set themselves up to be in a good position for the next election. You get the water quality check that box. You do the budget cuts. You go after these boards and commissions that do have some popular constituencies. Get this tough stuff out of the way now so that we, the legislature, can come in here a year from now, an election year, and just, it's all sweetness and light. The economy's great. We have money to spend, which is budget projections show they will have. So I thought in that sense it was a pretty good political speech.
And on these boards and commissions, I thought that was pretty much non-controversial when I first heard it. I appreciate the insight that you've given me, because what he's saying is we're giving too much control to boards and commissions.
And Dean, downstairs in the rotunda here, there's a bunch of people called lobbyists who are paid real good money to protect all those individual boards. Hair cutters, barbers, they've all got somebody down there arguing against that.
What did you hear in this speech, all of you, and I'll start with Jim. What did you hear about Governor Branstad protecting and calling attention to the legacy that he leaves as he moves to Beijing, China?
Well, I think when he talked about the farm crisis, when he talked about what Waterloo has done to overcome some of the difficulties that community has had, and Woodbine, I think that was saying like how far we came. And when he talked about the kids up here in the gallery that were in the work-based education, that was another thing that he's very proud of. So he mentioned a few of those. There wasn't a lot of time spent on walking down memory lane.
And in some sense, I got the impression he was trying to say, I leave it in your hands. This is what I have done. Now it's up to all of you, and this person that I have chosen as my lieutenant governor is going to pick up the reins and run with it.
Dave, you've been a long time with Branstad over the years. What did you hear about how he wants to be remembered, if at all, in this speech today?
Well, this is like the theater. The last act better be a good one, because that's the one people will remember. So I think he wants to go out as a moderate, a conservative, but a moderate conservative, not a guy with an angry side to him or a harsh side, an uplifting, a positive side. That's Terry Branstad by nature. So I think this speech sets the tone for that for him on the way out the door.
I even was struck by how the Senate Democrats, in talking with Rob Hogue, were saying some good things about Branstad, but also on water quality. They were saying we think we can work better with Kim Reynolds on water quality, that she has a better record than he does.
Well, sure. Those Senate Democrats now are looking at Terry Branstad that's much more moderate than a lot of these other Republicans. Those Senate Democrats are going to say, if we don't go along with what Terry Branstad wants to do, what the conservatives in the legislature want to do is going to be far worse.
Thank you for your insights. And thanks to all of you who've been watching this program over the years. And this Friday in Iowa Press, we'll be questioning Governor Terry Branstad on our on-site studio here at the Iowa State House. That'll be on Iowa Press Friday at 7:30 and Sunday at noon. For our entire Iowa Public Television crew here at the state capitol in Des Moines, along with our executive producer, Andrew Bott, thanks for joining us today.